So this is a home up in the mountains above Los Angeles. It has this deck on the front of it, and we were hired to repair it, recoat it, and it's a polymer modified cement, which is what we want to use up here in the mountains where we have potential of fire. And the big thing about this deck that's worth noting is this texture. Let's just get down here. Let's see. There's where you see it. It's a sand finish, and it's very uniform, and that's hard to achieve with a polymer modified cement. Typically, you trowel down the cement, get it relatively smooth, and spray a texture on it. I'm going to show you how we get this sand finish. It's not an approved finish by the manufacturer, but it's something that I figured out several years ago. Just for a starting point or reference, this is a repair area, and you can see the trowel marks, which is typical. They're typically covered up by the knockdown texture. You kind of see there where we've blended it into the old, and we want to have a very uniform surface. It doesn't have those trowel marks, that has that smooth sand finish over there. You can see where we stopped for lunch, and we'll blend that in. A cold joint is not a lot of work. We started by pressure washing the deck. We dried the deck, then we primed it with the LD1 modifier. Mix it 50-50 to prime it. We want it to get saturated down into the pores of the old material. And if you put solid primer on, or solid LD1 without diluting it, you'll get a skin on the top, which we really don't want. We want it to get down in there. Now, so I'm going to explain how I mixed up this texture. The deck, of course, before we ever got started, was washed and primed. You can see the work off here in the distance that we're doing, and I'm going to make another coat now, or another batch. I don't like to mix up a lot, probably only about a gallon at a time, maybe a half a gallon, somewhere in there. If you mix much more than that, it starts setting up in the bucket before you get to it. So you'll get to roll for about 15 minutes and then mix, and then roll for 15 minutes. So the mixture is this. We start with the polymer modified cement and the modifier. This is a LifeDeck product, so this is LD81, this is LD1, and I mix them like I normally would at the same ratios, and that's of course all on the bag. I don't have to tell you that. So I'm going to go ahead, stop this for a second, and I'm going to mix the cement and the 81 together. Then I'll show you how I alter that just a little bit to get the material that spreads really nicely with a roller for texture. So there's an ugly bucket full of material, but it is the consistency that you get when you mix it to the ratios according to the manufacturer. Now I'm going to do is I'm going to add this 1589 resin, and it's a compatible material. There are systems where you put just resin and cement over the top of fiber lath, but I'm just adding not a lot. I'm basically going to add it till it gets to about the consistency of syrup is what I want. So what happens is this resin, so what happens is this resin is thicker, it's more viscous, and so it holds the sand in suspension better than just the LD81 does, and it makes the whole consistency a little more uniform and a little more sticky, and allows you to roll it out. So I've mixed up the 1589 resin in with the standard LD81 and LD1, and each time I take a scoop with the roller, I'm just going to give it a little swirl to make sure the sand's suspended, and you just roll it out. And it's nice to work in multiple directions. Okay. And when I'm going onto that dry seam, I'm just going to flare it out, and you won't see it. It's a promise. And the big trick is to use a very small nap roller. We're just using a weenie roller. This is a very small deck. Take about an hour and a half to roll this whole thing out. It's 400 square feet, I think. And that's probably faster than masking off and blowing it with a texture gun anyway. Just depends. One thing about this little weenie roller arrangement is when you roll across and you see a little low spot, it won't cover it, like right there. And you just get a little more sand material and roll over it, and the suspended sand will fill that low spot, and it leaves you with an incredibly flat deck. And that's really all there is to it. On the edges over here, you kind of just paint it in with a chip brush. Here, one of these guys, I just dip it on there and paint it in. It flares nicely into the other work. I'm trying to hold this and do it at the same time. But this has been primed, and we've got a lot of resin mixed into this. You can see it's a lot more liquid than it would normally be. But it's nothing but glue and cement and resin, you know. So it really sticks well to the surface. It gives almost a plastic feel to it. And it receives see, there's a low spot right there. We can just load it up, and it just fills it right in beautifully. And it gives a very nice, consistent, smooth deck. So that's all there is to it. It's really simple, and it works extremely well. I'll give you a shot when it's all done. Now, I'll give you a couple notes about this. First is this is not approved by any of the manufacturers of this material. This is something that I developed on my own about 6 years ago when I was doing my own parking deck. It's elevated, it's above ground, and there is living space below it. And I didn't want a blown-on texture. I just felt it would be too much for the tires of the cars when they drove over. I thought it'd be too many tire treads and stuff, and so I just wanted the sand finish. And that was 6 years ago, and it freezes where I live, and it gets up to about 90 in the hottest days of the summer. So it's held up very, very well, and I've done this on several clients' properties and never had a complaint or a call back. Again, it's not approved, and I always tell everybody I can do it, but it's not approved by the manufacturer. Second thing I'll tell you about is this material has a tendency to get a little sticky as it ages in the pot, and you're going to want to thin it out just a little bit to get the last little bits out of the bottom of the pot. And don't do that with water. No! You want to do it with the LD81, and just keep it wet with that, and it'll stay sticky and uniform. If you do it with water, it'll get washed out. You run the risk of degrading the polymers that stick everything together and get an inferior product. So do it with the LD81. It is water it down. And the last thing is material usage. This is approximately 400 feet. I think it's like 370 or something like that. And we're just finishing up. We used an entire sack of LD1 and 2 gallons of LD81, which is the modifier, and 1 gallon of 1589, which is the resin. And that's a lot more modifier and resin than you would normally use. However, that's offset substantially by not having to mask it up, clean up the texture gun, which you usually end up throwing away when we're done, the hopper gun. It's so hard to keep them clean. And it's a much cleaner, neater installation. So I was coming up the back stairs, and I want you to just look down that. One thing about doing it this way is it really fills the low spots and makes a very flat surface. I like the way it comes out. Tomorrow we'll mask this off, put the color on it. It's going to be a nice brown color, and they'll have a beautiful deck.